The swamp was quiet, too quiet. Mark moved slowly through the thick mist, his boots sinking into the soft ground. Every step made a sucking sound as the mud tried to keep him there. The air was heavy with the smell of wet plants and something rotten. His visor displayed green readings, safe to breathe. But the swamp still felt dangerous. He had been here for 3 days, collecting samples for his research mission. The locals had warned him to stay away from the deeper parts, the place they called the death roots. They said nothing survived there for long. Not animals, not plants, not people. But Mark had never been one to walk away from a mystery. He was taking a sample of glowing moss when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost thought it was the wind. It came again, soft, high, and broken. Like someone crying, Mark froze. Every sense alert, the swamp played tricks on people. And sounds could carry strangely, but this was no trick. It was a voice, a real voice. It spoke in a language he didn't understand, but the tone was clear. It was the sound of someone in pain, someone calling for help. Mark looked around, trying to find the direction. The mist swirled, making it hard to see more than a few meters ahead. He tapped his visor, switching to thermal vision. Shapes of trees glowed faintly, but there far ahead was a smaller, flickering heat signature. It was weak and fading. Mark's heart began to beat faster. He didn't know who or what it was, but it was alive, and it was in trouble. He pushed forward, ducking under hanging vines and stepping over roots that twisted like snakes. The ground grew wetter, and soon he was wading through knee-deep water. Every shadow looked like it might move. The locals had told stories of vines that could wrap around you and drink your blood. Mark had laughed at the time. Now he wasn't. So sure, the crying grew louder, but weaker at the same time. It was the sound of someone losing strength. He pushed through a wall of thick leaves and froze. There, in a tangle of massive roots, was a tiny figure. She couldn't have been more than 4 feet tall. Her skin was pale with a faint pink glow under it. Her long silver hair was tangled. With bits of swamp debris, she wore a simple dress, now torn and soaked in mud. The roots around her were alive. They moved slowly, tightening and loosening like breathing muscles. Dark liquid dripped from them. Venom, Mark guessed. The girl's legs were bound, and one root was coiled around her chest. Another had pierced her arm, and thick black lines spread under her skin from the wound. Her eyes opened when she saw him. They were bright green, glowing faintly in the gloom. She didn't speak, but her eyes begged him to help. Mark's instincts screamed at him to be careful. If the roots could grab her, they could grab him too. But he couldn't just walk away. He stepped forward, pulling his survival knife from its sheath. The first cut made the root shudder violently. A splash of venom hit his glove, and the material began to sizzle. He cursed under his breath, switching to his plasma torch. The torch hissed, burning the root until it loosened. The girl gasped in pain as it released her. But she didn't cry out. He cut another root, then another. The vines reacted, lashing out at him, one wrapped around his wrist. Trying to pull him closer, Mark yanked hard, slicing it free before it could drag him in. He worked quickly, knowing every second counted. The venom was spreading through her body. He could see it in the black lines crawling toward her heart. Finally, the last root snapped and fell away. The girl collapsed forward, straight into his arms. She was trembling, her breathing fast and shallow. Her skin felt cold and damp. Mark could feel her heartbeat, weak and unsteady. She tried to speak, her voice barely a whisper. It sounded like healer. No more. But he couldn't be sure. Her hands were small, but he noticed strange glowing patterns on them. They pulsed faintly, like they were alive. Mark didn't know what they meant, but he knew one thing. If he didn't act fast, she wouldn't survive. He lifted her easily. She weighed almost nothing. The swamp seemed even darker now, as if it was watching him. Every rustle in the water made him turn his head. The roots he had cut were already moving again, searching for something else to grab. Mark started back toward camp, moving quickly. He didn't know who this girl was or why she was here, but he knew this: she needed him, and right now he was the only chance she had. Mark's boots splashed through the swamp water as he carried the small alien girl in his arms. Her breathing was fast but shallow, each breath sounding like a struggle. The black lines under her skin were spreading from her arm toward her chest. The venom was working fast, faster than anything he had seen before. His visor flashed red warnings, telling him her life signs were dropping. He ignored the alarms and kept moving. The ground was uneven, the water deeper in some places. And he almost slipped twice, but he held her tightly, refusing to let go. Her head rested weakly against his chest. Every now and then, her eyes fluttered open. Glowing faintly before closing again, she muttered words in her language, soft, desperate sounds he didn't understand. It was like listening to a fading song. Mark wanted to tell her she was safe, but he wasn't sure she would believe him. The swamp had a way of making hope feel far away. A shadow moved to his left. Mark turned quickly, spotting a long vine dipping into the water. It slithered like a snake, sensing him without thinking. He shifted the girl to one arm and drew his knife with the other. When the vine lashed at him, he cut it clean in half. The pieces thrashed in the water before sinking into the mud. Mark tightened his grip on her, muttering to himself, "Not today." He had to reach his camp, in the medical tent. He had a portable scanner and some emergency supplies. It wasn't much, but it might buy her some time. The swamp stretched endlessly ahead, every tree looking the same. He followed his visor's compass. Pushing through the mist, the water turned into sticky mud again, slowing him down. But the girl's heart beat against his chest, kept him moving. Every weak thump reminded him that she didn't have long. By the time he reached the edge of his camp, his arms were aching. He laid her gently on the medical bed and activated the scanner. The machine whirred, projecting a glowing image of her body. The venom was everywhere in her blood, in her lungs, even touching her heart. Mark's jaw tightened. The system listed possible antidotes, but none were available here. Then one word flashed on the screen: deathroot sap. The one thing he didn't want to hear. He had just come from there. And going back meant walking into danger all over again. He looked at the girl. Her lips were pale, her breathing slower now. Mark leaned closer, trying to keep her awake. "What's your name?" he asked. Her eyes opened just a little. "Lyra," she whispered. Mark nodded. "All right, Lyra, stay with me, okay?" Her gaze shifted to the scanner's image, then back to him. She raised a trembling hand, touching his arm. "You? Go, sap," she said in broken human words. Mark's stomach tightened. She understood how bad it was. For a moment, he hesitated. Leaving her here alone felt wrong. But if he stayed, she would die. He activated the tense stasis mode. A transparent energy field hummed to life, surrounding the bed. It would slow the venom spread, but only for an hour at most. Mark checked his torch. Fuel was low, but still usable. He took extra rope, a flare gun, and his strongest blade. Every step toward the death roots felt heavier than the last. The swamp seemed to sense he was coming back. The mist thickened again. Strange calls echoed through the air, some sounding almost like voices. Mark ignored them, focusing on his goal. The deeper he went, the more the ground pulsed under his feet. It was as if the swamp itself was alive. When he reached the death roots, they were moving, not like plants in the wind, like creatures waiting for prey. Their vines shifted toward him, slow but purposeful. Mark lit the torch, its flame casting wild shadows. The smell of burning plant flesh filled the air as he forced his way deeper. Somewhere ahead, the glow of the Root Queen's flowers lit the darkness. Mark's breath quickened. Those flowers held the sap he needed. But they were guarded by the Queen herself, a massive mass of vines. Pulsing with venom, he spotted one of the flowers, its petals glowing like molten gold. Reaching it meant getting past 3 thick root coils, each thicker than his arm. Mark waited for their slow sway, then slipped between them. One root brushed against his leg, and he felt the sting even through his suit. He bit back a curse and kept going. Finally, he reached the flower with one quick motion. He sliced it open. Thick, glowing sap spilled into his container, lighting up the swamp around him. The roots reacted instantly, tightening and rising like snakes ready to strike. Mark grabbed the container, securing it to his belt. But before he could retreat, the ground shook violently. The Root Queen was waking. Massive vines burst from the water, wrapping around nearby trees and pulling them down. The air filled with the sound of splintering wood and rushing water. Mark's path back was closing fast. He sprinted, dodging snapping roots. One struck his side, knocking the wind out of him. He stumbled, but didn't stop. Lyra's face flashed. In his mind, pale, weak, waiting, that thought gave him the strength to leap over the last coil and dive into the shallow water. He didn't stop running until the glow of his camp lights cut through the mist. Mark burst into the camp, his clothes soaked and torn. The container of deathroot sap clinked against his side as he ran to the medical bed. Lyra was still inside the stasis field, her body motionless. The black veins had spread further, thin lines crawling across her neck. Her breathing was slow, so slow that for a moment he feared he was too late. "Hold on, Lyra," he muttered, unlocking the field. He pulled out the container and poured the glowing sap into the injector. The liquid shimmered like molten light as it entered her veins. The black lines seemed to hesitate. Mark watched the scanner. Some of the venom was retreating, but most of it still held on. It was like watching two enemies fight inside her body. Her chest rose a little higher with each breath. But the readings warned him she was not safe yet. Suddenly her eyes opened wide, her back arched, and she gasped, clutching at his arm. "Too strong," she whispered in a trembling voice. Mark realized the antidote was burning through the venom, but also through her strength. He adjusted the injector, slowing the flow. She slumped back, sweat on her forehead. Mark wiped it gently, keeping his eyes on the scanner. It was going to be a long fight, and he had to stay awake for all of it. Hours passed in heavy silence. Mark checked her vitals again and again. The sap was doing its work, but the venom fought to stay. Sometimes Lyra shook violently, her hands glowing faintly before dimming again. Mark remembered the strange markings on her skin. They pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. He didn't understand what they meant, but they seemed tied to her life. Force once, during a quiet moment, she opened her eyes and stared at him. "You." "Human," she said softly, her voice broken but clear. "That's right," Mark said with a small smile. "You save me," she whispered. Mark hesitated, trying to, her lips curved just slightly. "You must hurry. For what?" Mark asked. She blinked slowly. "If I die, my people die too." The words hit him like a blow. "What do you mean?" he asked. Leaning closer, she coughed weakly. "I healer, only one left. Sickness, killing." All Mark's chest tightened. She wasn't just an innocent caught in the roots. She was the only hope for an entire village. If she didn't survive, they wouldn't either. Suddenly, this wasn't just about saving her. It was about saving many lives. He checked the scanner again. The venom was breaking apart. But one dark mass still pulsed near her heart. If it reached the core of her system, nothing would save her. He thought quickly. The sap alone wasn't enough. Her own body was fighting too. But she was too weak to finish the job. Mark had one risky option, a high-dose shock from the med unit to trigger her natural healing. But it could stop her heart if he miscalculated. He met her gaze. "If I do this, you might not survive," he warned. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. "Do it." Mark took a deep breath and prepared the charge. The machine hummed loudly. Power building. He placed the pads over her chest, watching the venom mass flicker on the scanner. 1, 2, 3. The jolt made her body jump. Her eyes flew open, glowing brighter than before. The markings on her hands flared, light spilling out of them. Mark shielded his eyes as the glow spread across her whole body. The scanner went wild. Venom readings dropped sharply. The black lines began to fade, replaced by a soft pink glow. Then the light dimmed, and she collapsed back onto the bed. For a moment, Mark thought he had killed her. Then she breathed in deeply, her chest rising in a steady rhythm. Mark let out the air he had been holding. The scanner now showed no venom in her system. She was weak, but she was alive. He leaned back. Feeling exhaustion hit him all at once, outside. The swamp was silent, almost peaceful, for the first time since he had found her. Mark believed she might survive, but his relief didn't last. The camp sensors beeped, warning of movement outside. Mark stood, checking the perimeter cameras. Figures were moving through the mist, at least 5 of them. They weren't swamp creatures. They were people, walking with purpose. And from their armor and weapons, Mark knew they were not here. To help, he looked at Lyra, still unconscious, still vulnerable. Then he looked at the incoming strangers. If they had come for her, they were already too close. Mark picked up his rifle, his jaw tightening. Saving her from the venom had been one battle. Now, it seemed, the real danger was only beginning. The mist outside the camp was thicker than before. Mark crouched near the doorway. Rifle ready, through the haze, shadowy figures moved slowly but steadily toward the tent. Their weapons glinted faintly in the dim light. He counted 5. No, 6 of them. They were tall, with long limbs and armor made of chitin plates. The design was nothing like human gear. These were from Lyra's world. Mark's heart pounded. If they were here for her. She couldn't defend herself. She was still unconscious, her body recovering from the venom. The glowing marks on her hands flickered faintly. She didn't even stir when the first shadow stopped, only meters from the tent. A voice called out in an alien language, sharp and commanding. Mark didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. "Come out." When he didn't respond, another voice spoke in broken human. "Hand over the healer. Or die here." Mark's jaw tightened. "Not happening," he muttered. The figures began to spread out. Surrounding the camp, Mark switched his visor to thermal view. The heat from their bodies glowed like red ghosts in the fog. If he stayed inside, they'd trap him. But if he left Lyra alone, they might grab her the second he stepped out. He needed a plan. Fast. His eyes landed on the flare gun. A risky idea formed in his mind. He set the camp's defense system to auto mode, then slipped out the back, moving low, the mist covered his movements as he circled behind the intruders through the fog. He saw them more clearly now. Insect-like features, mandible jaws, eyes that glimmered in the dim light. Each one carried a spear-like weapon that buzzed faintly with energy. Mark fired the flare high into the air. The sudden burst of red light startled them in that brief moment of distraction. He opened fire with his rifle. 2 went down, but the others dove into the mist, moving unnaturally fast. 1 lunged at him from the side, and Mark barely blocked with his blade. The impact rattled his arm. But he drove the blade forward, striking between the plates of armor. The alien hissed and fell. He had no time to breathe. A sudden tremor shook the ground. At first, Mark thought it was more attackers, but then he heard it. A deep, wet sound, like the swamp itself was breathing. The ground under his feet rippled, and from the water beyond the mist, something massive began to rise. It was the Root Queen. Mark's blood ran cold. He had wounded her territory earlier when he took the sap. She had followed the disturbance. Vines as thick as tree trunks writhed upward. Dripping venom, the alien warriors stopped their advance, staring at the monster in fear. Even they didn't seem ready for this. The Root Queen's tendrils lashed out, grabbing one of the warriors and dragging him screaming into the water. The others scattered, some retreating into the mist. But one, the leader, locked eyes with Mark. Even through the fog, Mark could see the hatred there. "This is not over, human." The alien spat in broken human speech before vanishing into the swamp. Mark didn't wait to see if they'd return. He turned and sprinted back to the camp. The tremors followed him. The Root Queen wasn't done. Her vines tore through the mist, snapping at trees and dragging them down. One slammed into the side of the camp, crushing a storage crate. Mark grabbed Lyra from the medical bed, holding her tightly. The tense supports groaned as another vine wrapped around them. He ran toward the shallow ridge behind the camp. The vines followed, thrashing wildly. Venom splashed onto the ground, burning through the moss and releasing a sharp, toxic smell. Mark's lungs burned as he reached the ridge. He slid down the far side, keeping Lyra close behind him. The Root Queen's bulk loomed in the mist, a tangled mass of roots and flowers, her glowing core pulsing like a beating heart. She didn't pursue past the ridge. Instead, she sank slowly back into the swamp, her vines curling protectively around her territory. Mark knew she wasn't retreating out of fear. She was guarding something. Maybe more flowers, maybe her young. Either way, he had no desire to find out tonight when he was sure she was gone. He carried Lyra deeper into the forest, away from the water. Her breathing was steadier now, but she was still weak. Mark set her down gently under the shelter of a large root arch. For the first time since the attack began, he allowed himself a moment to rest. The mist hung heavy, but the night was quiet. Too quiet. He knew the warriors would return, and now, with the Root Queen awake and hunting, the swamp was even more dangerous. But he also knew one thing. He wasn't leaving without Lyra, no matter what came next. The fight to save her had only just begun. Mark didn't sleep that night. He sat against the giant root arch with his rifle across his knees. The mist drifted through the trees, wrapping the world in pale gray. Lyra lay beside him, wrapped in a thermal blanket. Her breathing was better, but her strength had not returned. Every now and then, her glowing hands twitched, the strange markings flickering in the dark. Mark kept glancing at them, wondering if they were some kind of healing power she hadn't yet used. Just before dawn, the swamp stirred. A deep rumble came from far below, vibrating through the ground. Mark froze. He had heard that sound before. It was the Root Queen. The tremor grew stronger, and water rippled in a nearby pool. Something massive moved beneath the surface. Mark tightened his grip on his rifle, but he knew bullets alone would not stop her. The water in front of him bulged upward. Vines erupted like striking snakes, wrapping around trees and snapping branches. Then the bulk of the Root Queen rose, towering above him. Her body was a tangled mass of roots, flowers, and pulsing green veins of venom. Her central core glowed faintly, hidden deep within the writhing mass. She didn't attack immediately. Instead, she seemed to study him. Mark could feel something pressing against his mind. It wasn't words, but images, flashes of him cutting her vines, stealing the glowing sap. She remembered. Her tendrils moved slowly now, curling like the fingers of a massive hand. One slid toward Lyra, and Mark stepped in front of her. "No," he said sharply, his voice echoing in the still air. The Queen froze, then sent another wave of images into his mind. This time, he saw visions of the swamp creatures dying, plants withering. In every image, The glowing flowers were central. The queen was showing him her purpose. She was not just a monster. She was the heart of this place. Without her, the swamp would die. But then the images shifted. Lyra, standing with glowing hands, sending light into sick creatures, healing them. The queen's focus lingered on that image. Mark understood she wanted Lyra. Not to kill her, but to use her, maybe as a healer, maybe for something else entirely. He couldn't tell. Mark shook his head. "She's not yours," he said. The queen's vines coiled tighter, one slamming into the ground beside him in warning. The venom hissed where it touched the earth, burning it black. Mark's instincts screamed at him to run. But he stood his ground, meeting the glowing shadows that might be her eyes. Then a surprising thing happened. The queen's movements slowed. Her tendrils lowering just slightly. She sent a new image. Mark standing in her territory without fear. In the vision, he held a weapon made of vine and light. He understood this as her offer a bargain. If he agreed to something, she would let them both live. But she did not tell him the price. Mark thought quickly. If she wanted Lyra alive, she wouldn't harm her, but if he refused, the queen could crush them both before they took another step. Finally, he lowered his rifle. "What do you want?" he asked, though he knew she wouldn't answer with words. Instead, a vine slowly extended toward him. It stopped inches from his chest, then tapped lightly against his armor. The moment it touched him, heat flooded through his body. He saw flashes himself, walking into her territory again, deeper than before. At the very center, an enormous blossom pulsed like a living heart. In the vision, he cut it free and carried it away. The queen was giving him permission to take something even more valuable than the sap, but only if he swore to return with Lyra. When the images faded, Mark was breathing hard. He didn't know why the queen wanted this blossom gone. Maybe it was dangerous. Maybe it was part of some test. Either way, the deal was clear. Take it, protect Lyra, and she would not harm them. Mark looked at the unconscious girl, then back at the towering mass of vines. Slowly, he nodded. "I'll do it," he said. The queen's vines loosened, pulling back into the water. The tremor faded, and the mist swallowed her form until she was gone. Mark exhaled heavily, his legs finally shaking now that she was out of sight. He didn't know if he had just saved their lives or walked into an even greater danger when Lyra woke ours. Later, Mark told her only part of the truth. He said they needed to reach a special place in the swamp to help her village. She listened silently, then gave a small nod. Her voice was still weak, but her words were clear. "Then we go." Together, Mark helped her to her feet. Her steps were unsteady, but the glow in her hands was stronger than before. As they began walking toward the queen's hidden territory, the swamp around them seemed to watch every rustle of leaves. Every ripple in the water felt like unseen eyes following. Somewhere ahead, the beast below was waiting for him to keep his part of the bargain. The fog was thicker than ever. It curled around Mark and Lyra as they made their way deeper into the swamp. The air was cold and heavy, each breath damp and slow. Mark moved ahead, cutting away vines with his blade. Behind him, Lyra followed carefully, her glowing hands faintly lighting the ground. Her steps were still weak, but her eyes were sharp now, scanning the shadows. The swamp was quiet. Too quiet. No frogs, no insects. Not even the usual splash of small creatures in the water. Mark knew what that meant. Something bigger was moving nearby. He tightened his grip on his blade and looked back at Lyra. "Stay close," he whispered. She nodded, her face pale but determined. The queen's bargain still weighed heavily. On his mind, somewhere ahead, was the heart blossom she wanted him to take. He didn't understand why she had chosen him, or why Lyra had to be part of it. But he had learned one thing. Nothing in this swamp happened by chance. A faint sound reached his ears, branches breaking softly. It came from the left, then from the right. Mark stopped, listening. The sound wasn't random. It was footsteps, careful but fast. Lyra's hand tightened on his sleeve. "They are here," she whispered. Mark didn't have to ask who they were. The warriors from before had returned. Shapes moved in the fog, their outlines faint. They were circling, just like last time. Mark's mind raced. They couldn't run too far without losing their direction. The swamp was a maze, and getting lost meant death. He motioned for Lyra to stay behind him. One of the shapes lunged forward, spear raised. Mark blocked with his blade, the clash ringing in the still air. Another came from the side. Mark spun, striking low to knock the weapon away. But there were too many. The warriors hissed in their alien tongue, their voices full of anger. Mark knew they wanted Lyra. She stood with her back to a tree, her glowing hands ready. One warrior reached for her, and that was when the light burst from her skin. It wasn't just a glow this time. It was a wave of pale gold light. The warriors stumbled back, shielding their eyes. Mark felt warmth pass over him when he looked at Lyra. Her markings were burning bright. The ground around her shimmered as if alive. The warriors hesitated, then hissed and retreated into the mist. Mark stared at her, breathing hard. "What was that?" he asked. She shook her head. "The swamp answers to me." Her words sent a chill through him. Was that why the queen wanted her? They didn't have time to talk. The sound of rushing water came from ahead. Mark led her forward, and soon they stood before a wide, black pool. The fog clung low over its surface, hiding what lay beneath. "This is it," Lyra said softly. Mark frowned. "The blossom is under there." She nodded, and the guardian too. Before he could ask what that meant, the water broke. A massive shape rose, a creature of vine and bone. It had the same glow as the root queen, but was smaller. Faster, its head was crowned with flowers that opened and closed like breathing mouths. In the center of its chest, protected by layers of vines, was the heart blossom. Mark understood instantly. This was the final test. The guardian's vines lashed out. Mark ducked and rolled, pulling Lyra with him. The vines struck where they had stood, splashing black water. Mark's blade cut one vine clean, but two more took its place. The creature moved in a circle, herding them toward the pool. Lyra stepped forward, raising her glowing hands. Light spread across the vines, making them twitch and recoil. Mark saw his chance and rushed toward the heart blossom. The guardian struck again, but this time Mark was ready. He slid under a swinging vine, drove his blade between two protective roots, and tore the blossom free. The glow from it was blinding for a moment. The guardian let out a deep, shuddering sound, not pain, but surrender. Its vines lowered, sinking back into the water. The black pool grew still once more. Mark turned to Lyra. Holding the blossom, her eyes widened, and for a moment he thought she might collapse. But instead, she smiled faintly. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Mark tucked it carefully into his pack. "We need to get this back to the queen," he said. Lyra's smile faded, and then Mark looked at her, his voice low. "Then we find out if she keeps her bargain." They began the walk back. The fog seemed to part for them now. But Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the swamp was watching every step, somewhere out there. The warriors were still alive, and they wouldn't give up so easily. They followed a narrow trail of bright moss that lit up under Lyra's steps. The fog thinned as if the swamp itself wanted them to see the way. Mark walked ahead with the pack on his shoulders, feeling the warm pulse of the heart blossom through the fabric. Lyra moved more steadily now, the glow in her hands calm and soft. No birds sang, no insects clicked, and the water lay flat like black glass. It felt like a held breath before a storm. They reached the ridge where Mark had first faced the root queen. The mud there was churned and scarred by heavy vines. Mark stopped at the edge and took a slow breath. "We end it here," he said quietly. Lyra nodded, her eyes bright with a courage that made her look older than her years. The water stirred, and a deep tremor pushed through the ground. Vines uncoiled from beneath the surface like sleepy snakes waking to daylight. The root queen rose, taller and broader than before, her flowers opening and closing like living lanterns. She did not strike, she simply watched. Mark felt the pressure in his mind again, the silent voice that spoke in pictures and feelings. This time, he showed her the pack, and the glow inside answered. He unzipped it and lifted the heart blossom. Into the open air, the bloom pulsed with a steady golden light, spilling warmth across the wet roots. Lyra stepped beside him and placed her hands near the blossom without touching it. Her markings flared, and the light from the flower changed from gold to pale green. The queen's vines shivered as if they felt rain after a long, dry season. The images in Mark's head came fast and clear. He saw the swamp long ago, wild and balanced. He saw a sickness creep into the water, turning clear pools black and making the flowers twist wrong. He saw the heart blossom try to shield the swamp, and the queen shelter it at the center like a mother with a sick child. He understood the bargain at last. The queen had not asked him to steal a treasure. She had asked him to rescue a dying heart. "Set it down," Lyra whispered, her voice steady and gentle. Mark knelt and placed the blossom on a cradle of living vines that lifted like careful hands. The queen lowered many tendrils, not to crush, but to form a ring around them both. Lyra breathed in slowly and pressed her glowing palms together. Soft light flowed from her fingers like misty rivers, sinking into the blossom and then into the queen. The tremor underfoot changed from a warning to a slow rhythm like a heartbeat. For a long time, nothing else moved. Then the swamp exhaled, leaves uncurling, water lines rippling, tiny sparks of light flickering across the mud as if stars had fallen. Into the earth, the pale green glow spread out through the roots and veins, reaching farther and farther until the mist itself seemed to brighten. Mark felt the change in his chest, a loosening he had not known was there. He looked at Lyra and saw sweat on her brow. But her eyes were calm. She was giving, and the swamp was drinking, and nothing was breaking. A hiss cut through the calm like a blade. Shapes stepped from the trees. The tall warriors with kitten armor and humming spears. Their leader raised one hand and pointed at Lyra. "Give the healer to us, human," he said in broken human words. "Her work ends today." Mark rose slowly, placing himself between Lyra and the spears. "You saw what she is doing," he said, voice low but firm. "She is healing the land that feeds your people too." The leader's mandibles clicked with cold anger. "She is tainted by the queen and by you," he hissed. "Better one healer lost than a whole tribe changed." Before rage could push Mark into a fight he might not win, the ground answered for him. Vines lifted in a slow circle, not to strike, but to draw a living boundary around the clearing. The root queen's presence pressed heavier, a silent warning that even the warriors could feel. Some stepped back, fear breaking through their training. Lyra did not look at them. She kept her hands steady, her glow steady, her breath steady. Only when the heart blossom glowed with the same quiet color as her palms did she lower her arms. "It is done," she whispered, swaying a little. Mark caught her before she fell, holding her up with gentle hands. The queen leaned closer. A mountain of patient roots. She sent one final wave of images, simple and clean. A path through the swamp. A village of low homes, faces weak with fever. And then those same faces standing strong again under a new sun. Mark nodded, understanding the promise and the debt and the future in one breath. The warriors did not move, held between fear and pride. Lyra turned to them, her voice soft but carrying. "I am not tainted. I am your healer." She said in her own language. Her words struck the clearing like a bell. Two of the warriors lowered their spears first, then another. The leader stood rigid, but his eyes shifted to the bright water, to the living roots, to the steady woman. In a small body, at last his spear dipped. "We will watch," he said. Not warm. Not kind, but not violent. The Root Queen withdrew into the pool with the slow grace of an old tree settling deeper into earth. One vine remained, thin and braided with tiny leaves. It reached toward Mark and wrapped around his wrist without tightening when it pulled away. A bracelet of living fiber stayed behind, pulsing once with a faint light. "Protector's bond," Lyra whispered, smiling with tired pride. "It means the swamp will know you and not eat you," she added. And Mark actually laughed. For the first time in days, they followed the path shown in the images. By afternoon, they reached Lyra's village, a circle of homes built on raised roots above the water. Faces peered from doorways, thin faces, fevered eyes, hands that shook when lifted. Lyra asked for a bowl of clean water and knelt in the center. She dipped her hands, and the water lit from within. People came, one by one, and she touched their foreheads and palms. The light moved like a slow tide, and hope moved with it. Mark kept watch at the edge. But there were no more enemies here, only tired children who watched him with bold eyes, and elders who nodded to him with slow respect as the sun faded. Lantern seeds opened along the branches, little lights that looked like tiny floating moons. The village sang a low song he could not understand, but the meaning wrapped around him like a warm blanket. When it ended, the leader of the warriors stood near the gate, silent and still. He finally raised one hand in a short salute, not to Mark, but to Lyra, and then he was gone into the trees at dawn the next day. Lyra found Mark sitting on a root bridge, watching mist roll across the water. "You will leave soon," she said, gently. Not as a question, he nodded. "There are other missions, other places. But I will come back if you need me." She pressed a small charm into his palm, a circle of woven fiber with a seed at its center. "When you break it, the path to me will open," she said. He closed his fingers around it and felt the faintest thrum, like a heartbeat waiting. They walked together to the edge of the village. The swamp was different now, greener, clearer, awake. The Root Queen's pool lay quiet in the distance, a promise instead of a threat. Lyra faced him with a smile that was brave and a little sad. "Thank you, Protector," she said. "Thank you, Healer," he answered. The fog lifted for a moment, and sunlight touched the water with a bright hand. Mark turned along the moss trail, the living bracelet warm on his wrist, the charm safe in his pocket, and the sound of a healed swamp breathing soft behind him.